Welcome back. You're watching The Agenda. Now, South Africa's power utility, Eskom, has applied to Energy Regulator, the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, to improve a multiple-year electricity price increase, starting with a 36.1% price increase from April 2025. This is to reflect the actual costs of supplying electricity. Now, Eskom's tariff increase has been high for several years, while the country experienced rolling blackouts. For more on this, now we have the President of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa, Mametlwe Sebei, in studio. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure to be here.
Right. So let's start here. In some of your submissions, you have urged NERSA to reject Eskom's proposed tariff increase. Talk to us about this.
Yes, we absolutely reject what Eskom is proposing by way of new tariffs. And I think there's a context to that. The prices of electricity have been increasing, astronomically and beyond affordability of many working class and middle class people increasingly. I mean, the prices have actually increased by over 1,700 since 1996, right? To put that into context, in today's money, an average household will be spending about 634 rand per month on electricity. They are today spending, somewhere close to about 3,000. By this proposal, they will be spending over 4,000 rand a month just on electricity alone. And remember that with a modern household, electricity becomes a priority alongside the money for transport that people set aside to commute to work and so on. The third priority becomes food. That's the reason that the researchers are pointing out an average working class person is underspending on food by 52%. All of this crisis of people starving, of people being hungry, of people eating anything that passes for food, and we have this crisis of food poisoning and everything and so on and so on. It's just because of the deepening levels of hunger and poverty where Eskom has a role alongside many other state-owned enterprises which have been, commercialized. Services that were meant to be rights are now actually commodified and contributing instead of lowering the levels of poverty, which is what was the mandate of public services in 1994.
And here's the thing, you've also hit out at municipalities. I mean, you say the city of Johannesburg has exacerbated the burden by passing additional costs to consumers. And it's clearly tough times, but even more so for, of course, the working class as well. So you say this will deepen inequality?
It's not just Johannesburg. Johannesburg is just a well-known example. The reality is that almost every municipality, one or the other, is doing that. Cape Town has its own, additional charges that it makes, and every other municipality does that. And in fact, when you look at even just the debt, municipal debt to Eskom, which is estimated that will be somewhere at around 3 trillion in the next coming few years, right, by Eskom itself, is because they are trying to squeeze blood out of the stone insofar as the working class is concerned. Because of the neoliberal, right, financing framework for local government, where many municipalities are expected to generate 90% of their income, what we end up having is that they are using social services like electricity, like water, which also has increased by 2,100 since 1996 to generate that income in conditions of appalling poverty where people have to make a choice between paying the bills for electricity, for water, and of course buying food and making sure that they feed their children and their families.
So in as much as we're also able to just highlight problems as well as issues that plague society as well, the greater part is that we're also able to come up or propose solutions as well. So in an ideal world, ideally, what tariff would you like Eskom to propose, and how would you think the power utility should best navigate around this?
There is no question that lots of the cost of Eskom are avoidable. So let's start with the debt, right? A lot of that debt actually was accumulated during the years of what you call state capture. The debt was 40 billion in 2007. It skyrocketed to over 450 billion. Most of it is an odious debt, and we say it must be declared to be so. Just take an example, right? Hitachi, which was responsible for construction of these power stations, right, has been fined in the US for corruption it committed here in South Africa. And they are paying US government, not the people of this country, right? How is that so, right? They've been successfully prosecuted. We need to hold those people responsible for that corruption at Medupi, for that corruption at Kusile, responsible. But more than that, we argue that the working class must refuse to pay the odious debt, which were loaned by credit providers who were well aware about corruption that was involved. Secondly, Eskom is being swindled by IPPs, right? We are for renewable energy, and I'll come back to that, because we think these are cheap, sustainable resources that can afford, that can provide an affordable energy alternative for all. I mean, the price of solar and wind power today is about 37 cents per kilowatt and 34 cents per kilowatt and so on, right? That is a basis on which you could be able to have an affordable and as well as sustainable alternative energy in a country with a vast renewable resources. I mean, 2,500 average hours of sunshine in this country, and a long coastal line with an abundance of wind power that can power every house in this country at the same time as we're defeating climate change. That will argue is the issue. But with the IPPs, what is happening is that, for instance, Eskom pay 15 billion for an energy, otherwise it will cost it only 3 billion to generate. That is 5 times. But you can also look at coal suppliers as well, particularly Exaro, your Siriti. They have one-sided contract where Eskom on average is paying more than what it costs to buy coal in a global market. The result of which is that annually we are overspending 10 to 15 billion rand just in overpayment to coal. And I can go on, right? And about other coastal generation. Yes.
Sorry to come in there as well. I don't even want to be a doomsday advocate here, but I want to find out from you, because what you're saying right now could be something that may as well just be a long-term solution to this problem that we're currently facing right now, which could also take, years to even come to fruition. I want to hear from you what would be, a solution that would be a short-term solution that will be able to last for a while to come, because people want solutions, and people want solutions now.
We say cancel the odious debt. 1. 2, make sure that you have a publicly owned renewable energy program linked with a mass public works program to build the necessary infrastructure, but also a beneficiation of many mineral resources that are a raw material for a green renewable energy in what should be a green industrial revolution that will solve the crisis of energy in this country, at the same time as creating the millions of jobs. We say that cancel the special tariff pricing for big corporations that have ordinary working class people in this country, subsidizing with cheap electricity big corporations like your BHB Bilton and others that are owning matters, right? At the enormous cost to the working class people and so on. We say you could be able to have a cheap, sustainable, and we would argue renewable energy that would make sure that we make our contribution to mitigation of the climate disasters that are unfolding across the country and the world, at the same time as having an abundance of energy. We need to power economy, we need to power every house, and ensure that we do so in a manner that is compatible with a creation of jobs in an affordable manner that will allow us actually to supply a cheap and, of course, including a free, adequate, basic electricity for everyone.
And here's the thing, Mr. Sebei, we've heard of all these grand plans for many years on end. Let's hear from you. Do you think these plans would be sustainable in an ideal world?
What is happening now is not sustainable. And let's be clear about it. What is happening now was not a misfortune that fell out of the blue sky. Let me tell you this. I was at Netlec in 2009, right? At the time I was representing NACTU, and we had a debate about the choices that had to be made, whether to construct a coal-fired power station or go to renewables. At the time, they said renewables will cost something like 260 billion. They can't afford it. They are going for coal power that will cost 160 billion. We made 3 arguments. One was the enormity of the impacts of climate change that, for me, would be worth the difference between, this choice that I had to make. But let's leave that aside, But the disasters happening, the floods, the heat waves, all of that comes at enormous human and economic cost, of course. But more than that, we said the prices of renewables are falling. Since that time, wind and solar have fell by 80 to 70% in terms of their prices, right? At the same time, we made the argument that most of these big projects, remember that conversation took place against the background of the arms deal, where you're told it would cost this much, the costs were inflated and so on. And we said, these people are understating the cost. By the time you start construction, this will probably cost double what it would actually cost. What happened? From 160 billion, we ended up spending over 450 billion, and yet Medupi and Kusile barely function at an optimal capacity. And the question should be why? It is because Eskom is hijacked and captured by the coal and fossil fuel interests that are dominating its boards, as well as the so-called energy-intensive users group. Just look at the composition of their boards. Just look at who they appoint in the management. It's about crude class interest that plunder Eskom by way of special tariffs, by way of core supply contracts, by way of IPPCs, to ensure that they facilitate accumulation, particularly of the capitalist interests within what we call the mineral energy complex. So the solutions are not very difficult. What is difficult is a problem of the class and a political correlation in this country. The working class must organize to fight for a democratic control over Eskom, to ensure that we engineer on the basis of that a transition, a just, rapid transition to renewable that can also be, the basis, as I've said, for green industrial revolution, linked with beneficiation of the raw materials and the minerals in this country, to ensure that we supply everybody with an adequate, clean, and affordable energy for that matter.
And here's the thing, it's not really the first time that you've had an engagement of this nature with the power utility. Maybe if you can just backtrack a bit and just give us an idea of how some of those engagements prior to all of this have also went.
I've already spoken to you about the engagement when I was in Mametlwe in 2009, right? I think, as I've said, the arguments we've made, with hindsight, you can't doubt that we're correct, right? The costs of coal-fired power station have tripled. 2, the cost of renewables have come down, but also the problem remains, right? Even this conversation that you hear in the country about how renewables are not reliable, it's all, it's absurd, because you just have to use common sense, right? I'm from Limpopo, right? There, you have an all year round sunshine. All of that is electricity. People tell you that wind power is not reliable. You see, all of that movement that you see in the ocean, right? And you have never went to the sea and found the ocean static. All of that movement is an abundant energy that should be powering this conversation and homes, as well as industry and economy in this country and so on. Now, the reason that you have difficulty in making headways in this conversation is because of the vested corporate interests, which, as I've said, have captured Eskom as they've captured the state. Now, we talk about state capture, right? And they've, and quite correctly so, I must say, prosecuted, what you call the RET faction of the ANC and so on. But the crime I'm talking about, the Hitaki, was facilitated with this chap, which is Vali Musa, because that's the reason that Hitaki was found to have bribed ANC through a chancellor house that they got the contact at Medupi. Why has there not been a prosecution in this country, but there was successful prosecution of a Turkey in the US. It is because the capture continues. What we define as a capture is a question of, the factional struggles and the outcomes of it in the ANC, but also what is acceptable within the dominant factions of the capitalist class in this country. We need Eskom, we need economy, we need politics that can work in the interest of the vast majority of the working class people. And that's the reason we say that it's not just important that we develop a fighting strategy to oppose these tariffs, to fight for an adequate, free, basic electricity for all, but also as a labor movement, we need a political strategy. How do we take this lot out of power, including this government of neoliberal unity, which is a conspiracy against the working class?
So I want us to bring it back to the conversation now. I want to hear from you. How does the public, get their voice and add their voice onto this?
Well, there is going to be public consultation process. We will urge communities to go there, to participate, to voice, to articulate, themselves on this. But let's be clear, we have absolutely no faith in NESA because NESA has allowed this situation to go on for this long. And that again because of the compositions of some of these regulators. You have a situation wherein Eskom come and say, we need this increase so that we can be able to afford independent power producers. And they're not asking the question, how do we have electricity being priced in the interest of profiteering by independent power producers, not in the interest of an ordinary working class people that deserve, electricity as a matter of a constitutional right in this country, right? So it's because most of these regulators, they serve the interest of profiteering in the supply chains of the state-owned entities. It's true of NESA, it's true of many other regulators. What we do need is a working class movement that can be able to campaign on this issue. And one of it is to campaign for representation in NESA, in the decision-making around determination of what should be the cost of electricity in this country, including questioning the pricing system, which at the present moment make ordinary working class people to be able to subsidize the big corporation. Just think about this. You have a situation wherein the CEO of BHP Billiton, I don't know if they're still the owners, but I think they used to be the owners of the big smelters, including Hillside, that consume 5% of the entire Eskom supply of electricity, right? He, I think, was paid 234 million rand, right? Which it will take a worker on minimum wage in this country, 114 lives in each of them, working for 40 years without interruption, right? To be able to earn what the CEO has earned in 1 year. Yet, this worker on minimum wage is paying more for Eskom to subsidize a cheap electricity for the smelters owned by these entities, right? This is a problem that NESA is not addressing, and that's the reason we need a sustained mass campaigning. More than that, we do need the struggle for a political power as a workers' movement.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming through to the agenda this morning. And that was, of course, President of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa, Mametlwe Sebei, in studio with us.